Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation, featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 825 for June 28th, 2020. Coming up in a few minutes.
I got asked the other day, what do they think the next 5 to 10 years? I said, well, I can tell you what my future is going to be, retirement in 5 to 10 years. But, that's what you're supposed to do when you get that. Dad was about my age when he kind of turned things over to me, and once he saw that I had things well in hand and had the passion and really wanted to make sure we're making high quality liquids. I'm proud of everything he's doing, and he's doing a great job. So let him go. He's young and spirited and a lot like his grandfather. So I can see a lot of Booker in Freddie.
Fred Noe has been stuck at home in Bardstown, Kentucky since March because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's the longest he's ever gone without traveling since he replaced his father, the legendary Booker Noe, back in 2007 as Jim Beam's master distiller. And it's given him a preview of what his life is going to look like in the near future when he hands over the title to his son, Freddie. That day has not come quite yet, though, as the two worked together on a pair of new limited edition releases, a revival of the family's historic Old Tub Bourbon brand to celebrate the Beam family's 225 years of whiskey making, along with a 15-year-old Knob Creek Bourbon. I'll talk with Fred Noe about lockdown life later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more, all on this week's WhiskyCast.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Last Monday was the 2-year anniversary of the European Union's 25% tariff on imports of bourbons and other American whiskeys. That tariff has cost American whiskey makers an estimated $337 million in lost export sales. That's according to a new report this week from the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States. That tariff was a response to the Trump administration's decision to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Europe and other trading partners to protect the U.S. steel industry, and there has been little or no progress since in talks to resolve that dispute. What's more, this week U.S. trade officials kicked off another round of reviews of the 25% tariffs the U.S. imposed on single malt whiskies from Scotland and Northern Ireland last October, along with other European liqueurs and wines. The last time the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative reviewed those tariffs in February, more than 25,000 comments came in opposed to the tariffs, and the administration made only minor changes, mostly in the aircraft sector. Keep in mind that is where this round of tariffs came from, after the World Trade Organization allowed the U.S. to impose sanctions on European goods to make up for the economic damage caused by illegal subsidies to Airbus. Those tariffs have to be reviewed on a regular basis, and the U.S. could decide this time around to put more pressure on the EU by raising the current tariffs to as high as 100%, or adding more whiskeys from around Europe to the sanctions. Distilled Spirits Council Public Policy Chief Christine Lacascio is hoping cooler heads prevail once again this time around.
We continue to urge both sides to get back to the table and negotiate a solution. We recognize that these are long-standing issues. Obviously, in the aircraft subsidies case, this has been going on for 15 or 16 years. We recognize that. but we just want to get back to zero tariffs, is what we've enjoyed for the past 2+ decades, which has benefited both sides of the ocean on the spirits industry side.
The European Union has its own WTO case against the U.S. over subsidies to Boeing. A final ruling in that case is expected in the next several weeks, and the EU has its own list of U.S. goods ready to slap tariffs on. Right now, whiskies are not on that list, but the current tariff is scheduled to double to 50% next June, unless there's a deal on the steel and aluminum tariffs. Meanwhile, there's more than a bit of nervousness among bar and pub owners right now because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Pubs in England will be able to open for table service this coming Saturday, July 4th, for the first time since March 20th. There will be relaxed social distancing requirements allowing people to be 1 meter apart plus under some conditions. Northern Ireland's pubs can reopen on Friday, while Scotland will allow indoor service at pubs and restaurants to begin July 15th. There is no word on when Wales will follow suit. In Ireland, pubs can reopen starting on Monday, though patrons will only be able to stay for an hour and 45 minutes and have to buy at least €9 worth of food. Now, all this assumes there will be no serious increases in COVID-19 cases in the coming weeks. And as we have seen in the last couple of weeks here in the U.S., pubs have become a major source of new infections. Spikes in coronavirus cases have forced the indefinite closings of bars statewide as of this past Friday in Florida and Texas, where the state's governor told an El Paso TV station Friday night that he probably should not have allowed bars to open up so quickly. Sunday, California's governor ordered bars in Los Angeles and 6 central California counties to close, while recommending that bars in 8 other counties be closed, while not making it mandatory yet. Bars in San Francisco remain closed, but those that serve food may be eligible for the city's program that lets them use sidewalks and parking spaces for outdoor service. Next time around, I'll talk with H. Joseph Ehrlich of Elixir in San Francisco about the impact of the pandemic. We reported last week on Diageo's $20 million community fund to help black-owned hospitality businesses in the U.S. recover from the coronavirus pandemic. This week, the spirits giant announced an additional $80 million in funding over the next 2 years for Raising the Bar, a program to help hospitality businesses around the world. In the UK and other countries, there will be funding to help pubs pay for hand sanitizer dispensers and other protective gear, along with online reservation systems, cashless payment systems, mobile bars, and outdoor equipment. In the U.S., where a number of federal and state laws ban direct financial aid to bars, the fund will support charities and help with training programs. We should note that more distilleries in Kentucky are now opening up to visitors. Wild Turkey in Lawrenceburg is now open Thursdays through Sundays, while Sazerac's Buffalo Trace and Barton 1792 distilleries will open with social distancing restrictions in place starting this Wednesday, July 1st. Jephthah Creed in Shelbyville will open for limited tours starting Thursday, and Diageo will open the Bullet Distilling Company in Shelbyville and Stitzel Weller Distillery in Louisville starting this Friday. As of now, Beam Suntory and Brown-Forman have not announced any plans to reopen their distilleries for tours and tastings yet. While Brown-Forman's Old Forester Distillery in downtown Louisville remains closed to visitors, the brand did unveil this year's birthday bourbon this week. It's being bottled at the distillery, and it seems fitting that the 2020 edition will also be the 20th bottling of the birthday bourbon, which commemorates George Garvin Brown's birthday on September 2nd. This year's edition is made up of 95 barrels filled 10 years ago on June 5th, 2010. It'll go on sale September 2nd, with a recommended retail price of $129.99 a bottle. Glenfarclas is wrapping up its Pagoda series with the Sapphire Reserve. It's a 63-year-old single malt and the 5th and final whiskey in the Pagoda series. This one will come in silver and gold editions. The silver edition comes in 70 CL bottles, priced at 24,000 pounds each. That's $29,710 U.S., while 45 gold edition 1.5-liter bottles are available. The price tag, 56,000 pounds each. That's $69,330 at current exchange rates. They're available through the Whiskey Exchange or the distillery's website, and George Grant of Glenfarclas will be joining us on the Whiskey Wednesday webcast this coming week. It'll be a few years before we get to taste this one, but Isle of Arran Distillers has decided to create a unique reminder of 2020. They're blending new make spirit from both distilleries on the island, the main Arran distillery in La Cranza and the new Lag distillery at the southern end of the island. Project North and South comes from the first still runs produced at both distilleries after they reopened last month. It'll eventually be bottled as a blended malt. Earlier this month, we reported on Brian Kinsman's departure from Middleton Distillery in Ireland to join a startup project in Minneapolis, along with Kevin O'Gorman's appointment as master distiller to succeed him. Now we have details on Kevin's new apprentice of sorts. Catherine Condon was named distiller at Middleton this week. She started out as the distiller at Middleton's micro distillery after completing the company's graduate distiller program, and was the production supervisor at Middleton before her promotion this week. Finally, please join me in thanking two longtime friends of WhiskyCast who are retiring this week. Ann Miller has been a guest on WhiskyCast many times over the years in her role as the international brand ambassador for Chivas Brothers, primarily representing Aberlour's single malts. She helped create the modern-day role of a brand ambassador more than 20 years ago, and as her colleague Ian Logan said this week on Facebook, Ann and the late Sandy White were the ones who inspired him to become a brand ambassador in the first place. Ann was also a member of the Spirit of Speyside Festival board for many years, and will be joining her husband Nick in retirement. If you watched our Whiskey Wednesday webcast the other night, Chivas Brothers blending director Sandy Hislop broke the news about Colin Scott's retirement after 47 years with the company. He was the longtime master blender for Chivas Regal and started preparing for retirement a couple of years ago by taking on the title of custodian master blender. We wish Colin and his wife Penny, along with Ann and Nick, the happiest of retirements. And thanks to both of you for putting up with all of my interview requests over the years, especially with Ann on very short notice at more than a few whiskey festivals. Here's to both of you, and thanks once again. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery and its new Larceny barrel-proof wheated bourbon. It's made the way purists love bourbon, non-chill filtered and at barrel proof with a bold yet balanced taste. It's a new take on the old Fitzgerald legacy and started winning awards even before the first bottles hit the shelves. Look for it at a whiskey shop near you and get all the details at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. We have another great lineup for this week's Whiskey Wednesday webcast. Dr. Kirsty McCallum, who joined La Martini K's earlier this year as the whiskey maker for the Glen Murray single malts, and Cuddy Sark will be with us, along with Rebecca Jago of The Last Drop, and as I mentioned earlier, George Grant from Glenfarclas. We start the fun at 5 p.m. New York time. That's 10 p.m. London time, 2100 GMT elsewhere in the world. You can watch us live on our YouTube channel, the WhiskyCast Facebook page, Twitter, and Periscope. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. Let's start off with the latest event cancellations and postponements. As expected, the American Craft Spirits Association has now officially canceled its annual conference that had already been rescheduled once for August 7th through the 9th in Portland, Oregon. We reported several weeks ago that ACSA was working with local convention planners and their host hotel in Portland on canceling the event. Also, Royal Mile Whiskies will not be holding its annual Whiskey Fringe in Edinburgh that same weekend in August. The retailer announced this week that there is a tentative plan to hold it the weekend of October 23rd through the 25th if public health restrictions allow, but ticket holders can start requesting refunds now. That same weekend was also supposed to bring us Whiskey Live in Perth, Australia, but it has now been postponed until the weekend of November 20th and 21st. We are waiting for word still on the fate of the Whiskies of the World shows August 7th in San Jose, California, and the next night in San Francisco. The organizers had indicated that a decision might come at the end of this past week, but we have not heard anything as of showtime. Also, the Steers and Beers Whiskey and Beer Festival, scheduled for August 15th in Colorado Springs, Colorado, has now been postponed. No new date has been announced. As of now, these events are still on the schedule. McTeers in Glasgow, Scotland will hold its next whiskey auction this Friday, July 3rd, and with government guidance now allowing in-person bidding, plans for a virtual auction have been scrapped. The Scotch Whisky Experience in Edinburgh will hold its next Scotch Whisky Training School on July 7th, and the Taipei Whiskey Club will have its charity tasting to benefit Harmony House on the 11th in Taipei, Taiwan. Moonshine University in Louisville, Kentucky has a Stave and Thief Society Executive Bourbon Steward course on July 17th, and the Bristol Whiskey and Spirits Festival is set for July 18th in Bristol, England. Finally, the virtual events for Belfast Whiskey Week get underway July 24th and run through August 1st in Northern Ireland. Don't forget, these events are all subject to change at the last minute, depending on local public health restrictions because of COVID-19, so make sure you check each event's website before you make any firm plans. We update the calendar at whiskycast.com all week long as we get word on changes from event organizers. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of Virginia's most awarded spirits. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states and on 3 continents, as well as online. Visit the Where to Buy page at CatoctinCreekDistilling.com to find a retailer near you. And please drink responsibly.
From deep in the north, far beyond the wall, the howl of the frozen wind brings word of something new. A whiskey from the land of always winter, for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock. Fred Noe has been Jim Beam's master distiller since 2007, when he took over for his father, Booker Noe. And like Booker, Fred has a big laugh and a big personality. Now, just imagine Fred being cooped up at his home in Bardstown, Kentucky for the last 3 months because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and spare a thought for his wife, Sandy. Fortunately, his grandkids live next door, and he's been able to be with them in between Zoom calls and the occasional trip to the distillery, where Fred, his son, and heir apparent Freddie, and the team have been working on 2 new limited edition bourbons, a 15-year-old Knob Creek, and the revival of the Beam family's venerable Old Tub Bourbon label, also a limited edition release. I spent some time on the phone with Fred, Thursday afternoon. So, Fred, tell me what you've been doing to keep busy the last 3 months or so. I got to figure this is about the longest you have ever spent not going on the road in years.
Absolutely, Mark. I've been grounded pretty much since March, and haven't made a trip at all anywhere. I mean, I'm sure Sandy's getting tired of seeing me here every day, but working from home just like everybody else, conference calls, and, we're just, everybody at Beam is working pretty much from home and getting it down the plant when I need to run down there. I can, be real close, wearing masks all the time, and just trying to hopefully get this corona thing knocked out. But, how it is. It seems to be hanging on.
And you are wearing a mask, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I'm doing all the stuff. I'm being warned pretty heavily by my daughter-in-law. It's a nurse with my pre-existing conditions. She's warned me pretty heavy to what to do, what not to do. And it's right next door, so there's no sneaking out. I'm pretty much locked down for sure, but it's all good. It's all good.
You haven't had a chance to hang out with the grandkids, though, too, right?
A little bit. Them being right next door, they're locked down too. So I was actually with little Booker. We were drawing on the concrete today with some chalk while his mother and Freddie were doing some stuff. He was hanging out with me. I was surprised I let him hang with me that long. Me and that boy's going to get in some trouble one of these days.
How old is little Booker now? He's about, 2, right?
Almost 2. He'll be 2 in September.
Wow.
Yeah, he's just starting to figure it out. He's learning that Papa will do whatever he wants to do. All you got to do is just take me by the finger and we're on our way. That's what it's supposed to be.
Let's talk about...
Like Dad was with Freddie.
Let's talk about Old Tub first. This is a brand that goes way, way back in your family, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That was as far back, I guess probably one of the first brands, the family, even before they were physically putting liquid in bottles, we found some old ledgers. And when people would come to the distillery and buy the bourbon straight from the distiller, we found it in ledgers where people were buying quarts of Old Tub back in the 1800s. So that's one of the oldest, I guess, brand names for our company, our family. That's what we called the liquid, one of the, the earliest brands in the company. And to be honest, Dad drank Old Tub religiously until it was, it got scaled back, and then it was discontinued. And he threw a fit with our leaders in Chicago at the time, because that was his drinking whiskey. And he could only get it here in Kentucky at the end. And then it even got to the point to where Dad was getting it. It was the same liquid as being bottled under another label. They let one liquor store in Kentucky sell it to the Booker. So that was one of his favorite liquids. I mean, it was something I guess he grew up with, seeing, and then he drank quite a bit until it was discontinued in the 70s.
Is it fair to say that move to discontinue it was maybe sort of kind of what led to the creation of Booker's?
Well, no, I think a lot of it was, just everything, as you well know, in the 70s, everybody was scaling bourbon back and lightening it up, making lighter flavors, filtering more, lower proofs. And Old Tub was a big, robust 4-year-old bottled in bond bourbon that was only, for the people who wanted true old style bourbon. And I'm sure Dad had probably helped him create some of the small batch bourbons with the big flavors when he wanted to get back to the way bourbon used to be, the way it was meant to be. And we thought it would be kind of cool with, the retro, people like old historic brands. And we were selling it at our visitor center only. And we saw that a lot of our visitors liked the label, liked the story. And so we thought we would take it out. But we did make a minor change. It's pretty really major for distillers, but doing away with chill filtration. So it's still a 4-year-old, 100 proof, bottled in barn, but no chill or carbon filtration to give it more flavor, to kind of get back and mimic the way it was maybe would have tasted back in the old days.
And I was about to ask about the difference between the limited edition you're releasing now and the stuff that you sell at the Still House in Claremont, because I know that also came in a smaller bottle too, right?
Yep, that was $3.75. This is a $7.50, and like I say, we've to get more flavor for the people. We did away with the chill filtration, which brings a little more of the fatty acids and stuff over from the distillation, and folks that are know their bourbon know that non-chill filtered whiskey, the only thing is if it gets cold, it might get a little haze in it. But as far as flavor, more flavor comes through from the way it come out of the barrel. So that was after a lot of tasting and testing. Freddie and me tested and tasted, which is always fun to do. We've made the call. Let's go with it, and it'll be some special liquid for folks who. A lot of people remember Old Tub. It wasn't that long ago that, back in the 70s, especially here in Kentucky, because it was kind of a local brand, and a lot of old timers remember it. I've actually, since we've done a little media release on it, I've had a couple emails from people, where do I get it? I want to get some of that. I remember that when I was younger. I drank some with your father years ago. It was one older fella. I said, well, you should be able to get it soon in the liquor stores. So it's pretty exciting.
But it's not going to come back permanently, is it?
At this point, it's an LTO, and we'll see. I mean, Freddie's keen on bringing back some of the older stuff, if we can mimic it. So it could be released again. I'm not going to say no, because, if the response is because I'm sure when mixologists get a hold of it, it'll be a great liquid for making some cocktails with. And the bottle, it's going to be the round bottle like it used to look. It's going to look nice on the back bar. I think it'll grab a little attention. And once people taste it, I think they're going to see that it's a great bourbon. It's very mixable, plus great on the rocks or with a splash of water. I would hate to say no, and then, you know how it is. If it's a big success, I would say we will probably release some more, but it's not in the plans at this point.
Well, you mentioned the small batch collection, and you guys have really sort of been stepping things up with Knob Creek the last year or two, with older releases of Knob Creek, with first the 12 and now a 15-year-old.
Yep.
Tell me about that 15.
Well, we like to do limited releases on the Knob Creek, and a few years ago we had some issues with some inventory issues where we ran a little short and we had to pull that age statement off, to my displeasure. And over the years I've been preaching, I think age statements are important for super premium bourbons that had age statements. When you start taking them off, people don't really know what's in the bottle. And I think to appease me and, listening to me talk kind of helped that go. And Freddie gets it. He knows that Knob Creek was near and dear to my heart. And, it was created by Dad and given to me by him. So I want to try to protect it. And I think folks who enjoy Knob Creek like the fact that it's aged longer than most super premium bourbons. And so we, over time, with working on our inventory issues by laying down more and watching our inventories closer. And we've been able to hold some barrels back, get a little age on them just for this release. And so we're going to have the 15-year-old with a limited release. And so far, a few folks that have gotten it have been very happy with it. So, it's still near and dear to me. And I think at age, the wood helps it quite a bit if you like that flavor. And, Knob Creek has been a very successful product for us over the years. And removing the age, like I said earlier, removing the age statement was something I wasn't real crazy about. So getting it back was kind of a celebration for me and made me feel good. And so doing this extra age, Freddie said, what would you think if we held some barrels back, aged it a little longer? I think it'd be better. So we tasted and tested and looked at barrels that had a little more age on them. And that's how we got these barrels for this release. We're going to have it, which I think it's cool to do those things. If you can segregate a few barrels, lay them back, watch them. Don't let them get too woody. But, have some limited releases to, have something special. People want different things, and we are trying to do that. Freddie and myself are having fun, working together, creating these things.
Well, you mentioned whiskey's getting too woody, and speaking of father and son distilling teams, your counterparts over in Lawrenceburg, Jimmy and Eddie, have had that disagreement over age statements or over aging in the past. And you know where I'm going with this. Jimmy doesn't like anything over 15 years, and Eddie keeps releasing 17-year-old ones just to drive him nuts. Is there a point at which bourbon gets too old?
Right. It can, Mark, and I think a lot of it depends on where you have the barrels stored within the rack house. Greatly affects how much wood influence you get over the time. I mean, if you put it up high, in these big 7 to 9 story rack houses that we have here, you'll get a lot of wood real quickly, and it'll get so woody that the wood takes over. But if you're, middle to lower storage, you can get a little more age on it and still get the influence slower. The liquid will age slower, lower in the house, and you can, get more age on it to get that wood, to get a little more wood in it, but not let the wood take over. I'm sure you've tasted some products that were way too much oak to them, and they get too astringent, and it just gets, you lose the balance, yeah. I guess would be a good way to put it. But that's personal preference. I know Eddie likes to aggravate Jimmy a lot. And we joke about it all the time. He says us young ones, we like it a little older. And he said, me and Booker wouldn't go for that. I said, well, you're saying that. Booker's not here to defend himself, but that is. Jimmy just likes to aggravate us, since we're the next generation. You know how that goes.
I hear that.
We like to give him a hard time too. It goes both ways.
So speaking of next generations, I see you're turning over a little bit more of this stuff to Freddie now. At least it would look like it from the outside.
Absolutely. And I am doing that. He's earning his wings. He's taking the business, and he's very, with his little book releases, and he's shown that he's got the passion. All he wants is high quality liquid coming out of our distilleries. He fights for the stuff that we need to protect, like our yeast, no enzymes, to keep the legacy the way it was, the way it's always been, the Beam way, as we say. He's worked a lot with the partnership with the University of Kentucky, the James B. Beam Spirits Institute, where we're going to start educating the distillers of the future He's really grabbed the bit like the racehorse, and he's running with it. And so the longer he'll run, I'll give him more reins, and he's instrumental in our Fred Noe craft distillery that's under construction as we speak. So he's taking on more and more responsibilities every day, even during the Corona thing. He's been working diligently on all these different fronts. He's on conference calls way more than me. And when people get into stuff, I always say, well, you might all be talking to Freddie, because, I got asked the other day, what do they think the next 5 to 10 years? I said, well, I can tell you what my future is going to be, retirement in 5 to 10 years. But, that's what you're supposed to do when you get that. Dad was about my age when he kind of turned things over to me. And once he saw that I had things well in hand and, had the passion and, really wanted to make sure we're making high quality liquids. I'm proud of everything he's doing, and he's doing a great job. So, let him go. He's young and spirited and a lot like his grandfather. So I can see a lot of Booker in Freddie as I watch him and work with him. It's a pleasure. It's been great for me. I love it. It's good. I know all fathers would love to have their sons follow in their footsteps and do that. I know a lot of my friends tell me how lucky I am that their sons didn't do like that. I said, well, maybe I drew the right straw or something. I don't know.
Do you have a timetable for turning things over to him yet?
Not really. We're still just kind of, he keeps telling me, you're not going anywhere, Dad. I like having you around. So as long as he likes having me around and I can, keep doing what I'm doing and not, being in the way. You're not in the way, Dad. I like having you. I said, okay. But I think it's time to kind of slow down a little bit, just be involved in product development with him. I taste barrels, taste new products they're working on. He gets my opinion, people in the lab. I'm still, but as far as travel, we're not doing, we've pretty much, the company has said no travel until we deem it safe. I don't see that happening anytime soon. So we'll, and even when I do draw back, I can still help entertain customers that come here to the plant, for barrel selections and new product rollouts and things like that. So I'll still be involved. I'm not going to go away and hide or anything. He's not going to let me. Living next door to me, he can keep an eye on me too. So that's a good thing.
So are you itching to get back out on the road at some point here soon?
Oh, I'd like to do a farewell tour. You know how that is. Tell everybody goodbye and take Freddie out and introduce him to some of my old friends that he hasn't ever met before, and especially in the international markets. Like he's never been to Australia. I'd like to go over there. We had a plan for this year. We were actually going to go to Australia, and I was going to introduce him to the Australian market and let him meet the 8th generation Beam family distiller. But COVID thing kind of ixnayed that. So maybe next year, we'll see. We'll see if everything settles down and we can get on airplanes and fly around the world and do all that. But, in Europe, he's never visited the European markets. So there's, our international sales meeting. I need to take him to one, take him there and introduce him to the world and say, this is the next, they all know me from my speaking engagements over the years. But I think it's a formal passing of the torch with our distributor partners and customers would be fit for him, kind of like Booker did me. Well, we kind of, say, well, I'm about done for. Here's the future. And he's ready. He's ready to, to do that, take on that responsibility.
Are you driving your wife nuts, being around the house all day long?
I think so. I've kind of got a little dose of what it'd be like to be retired, and I'm not in a big hurry to be here 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And I know she's not ready to have me here all that time either, but, it's all good, though.
Once again, spare a thought for Sandy Noe. By the way, Fred also told me about his Father's Day present from Freddie. He got it on Wednesday, the very first bottle of Freddie's latest Little Book whiskey to be released later this summer. The only thing we know about it, this year's edition will be named Lessons Learned, according to Fred. That's because it's the only thing Fred really knows about the whiskey, and Beam Suntory had 3 PR people listening to the interview, just to make sure Fred didn't spill any other details. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with the Old Tub Bottled in Bond Bourbon. Of course, as with all bottled in bond whiskies, it's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose is spicy with hints of cinnamon and black pepper, along with touches of honey, vanilla, and charred oak. The taste is intense, spicy, and powerful, with cinnamon, black pepper, and chili powder notes, balanced by honey and charred oak in the background. Now, if you add some water, it opens up the honey sweetness and just a touch of butterscotch. The finish is long and spicy with a nice smoothness. I'm scoring the Old Tub Bottled in Bond Bourbon a 93. Meanwhile, Wild Turkey is out with its own Bottled in Bond Bourbon. It's only the second time Wild Turkey has ever released a Bottled in Bond Bourbon, and this time it's Eddie Russell's 17-year-old Master's Keep Bottled in Bond. The nose has notes of toasted oak, soft spices, and just a hint of cherry cobbler. The taste spicy and warm with black pepper, a hint of clove, black cherries, toffee, and a subtle hint of campfire smoke in the background. The finish, long and gentle. It's excellent, and I'm scoring the Wild Turkey Master's Keep Bottled in Bond a 94. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey and its new Brewer's Select Rye Ale Barrel Finish. It's a collaboration between Sagamore Spirit in Maryland and Sierra Nevada in California, where they filled up Sagamore Spirit barrels with their red ale beer, then shipped the emptied barrels back to Maryland to give Sagamore Spirit Rye a unique touch. Look for it now at select retailers and get the whole story at sagamorespirit.com. Let's look at the Grace O'Malley Irish Whiskey. It's a blend of whiskeys from Great Northern Distillery and Cooley, matured for between 3 and 10 years, and bottled at 40% ABV. The nose has a nice maltiness with honey, butterscotch, and dried fruits. The taste has a good balance of fruity character and subtle spices, along with almond oil and just a hint of oak tannins. The finish, long and well-balanced with subtle spices, toasted vanilla, and a good fruity character. I'm scoring the Grace O'Malley Irish Whiskey a 90. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. I've added my tasting notes for these whiskeys to our searchable list of more than 2,900 different whiskeys at whiskycast.com. Check it out this week.
The search never ends, but it's nice when you can come in for a landing, pause and explore the silky smoothness of single pot still Irish whiskey, matured in the finest bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks. Land on Redbreast, then be sure to pass it on. Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, brought to you by Lot 40. Words have meaning, and the words we choose can make the difference between making the whiskey world more welcoming and inclusive or making some people feel uncomfortable. There's been a lot of talk in other fields these days about removing words like master from their terminology. For instance, both electrical engineering and computer programming often use the words master and slave to describe circuitry or code that's dependent on a larger or master piece of the project. It's also the same in photography when one is using more than one flash unit. The one that triggers the other flashes is referred to as the master, and the remote-triggered flashes are labeled as slave units. Those terms are being replaced by words like main and secondary in many fields. And it also applies in whiskey, where the terms master distiller and master blender are relatively new terms that were created largely by marketing departments back in the 90s. However, they do remind some people of the American whiskey industry's historical connections to slavery before the Civil War. Now that's a really long explanation for the poll question we asked this week on Twitter. Should the term master distiller or master blender still be used, given that there are no standards or qualifications in most places for one to claim the title? 835 people voted in the poll. 21% were willing to dump the title, while 38% want to keep it. But a plurality, 41%, are willing to discuss the idea. Just a few of the comments. Gary Haggart, the head distiller at Lindores Abbey Distillery in Scotland, tweeted this: I do believe it's a relevant title. They are a master of their craft, but it should be earned over many years, demonstrating both theoretical and practical mastery over, say, 20-plus years. In Japan, to be given the title master takes 30-plus years. Alan Anderson, who has spent more than 25 years working at distilleries in Scotland, added this: It's a title too often used by people not worthy. Not a fan, so drop it. It's misleading like those that claim to make whiskey but don't distill. Longtime listener Scott Rogers tweeted a thread of replies, including these: I have no problem with it as a formal title in a company, but as an informal honorific, it seems like the kind of courtesy more likely to be extended to white men at an earlier stage in a career than to others. As an informal honorific, shouldn't a master blender be in charge of some number of other blenders beneath her? Like the sole blender at a small distillery is the blender. The chief blender at a large distillery, or across multiple distilleries, is the master blender. Josh Wright at Sipology Blog added this: People read way too much into it. It's simply a job description. That said, I prefer chief distiller or something like that to avoid that baggage. At Ask Rye Not, I consider it marketing, like small batch or single barrel. Sometimes it means something. Many times it doesn't. Yorworth Griffiths at YorworthG from Wales tweeted this: A master in this context would have come from a guild, as the person would have gone from apprentice to journeyman, then to master in their craft. It's simply a marketing term now. Sounds better than head or chief distiller, I guess. By the way, it does turn out there is a way to earn the title of master distiller. The Institute of Brewing and Distilling in the UK offers a certification program leading to that title. The prerequisite is earning a diploma in distilling from the Institute, or the equivalent degree from Heriot-Watt University in Scotland, or Ireland's Institute of Technology in Carlow. For now, here at WhiskyCast, we're going to continue to use the terms master distiller and master blender when it's someone's actual job title. But this is a discussion that is not going to be going away anytime soon. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at WhiskyCast. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Let's wrap things up now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and all those other things that combine to make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. There are really only two ways you can store a barrel of whiskey while it matures, either on its side or on its end. Dunnage-style warehouses have been popular for decades in Scotland. In a Dunnage-style warehouse, the barrels are weight-bearing. They'll be rolled onto two planks and then braced with wedges to hold each barrel in place. Once one row is complete, the warehouse crew will place a couple of more planks on top of those barrels and then use a forklift to roll another row of barrels into place, usually followed by a third row. It is rare to see barrels more than 3 high in a dunnage warehouse, though. Rickhouses use a wooden rack or frame that's called a rick to hold barrels in place, but with multiple floors and ricks that can hold as many as 5 barrels on top of each other. But as with dunnage warehouses, the barrels are rolled into place on their sides. Palletized warehouses are the only ones where barrels are stored on their ends, with 6 barrels loaded onto a pallet and then lifted into place with a forklift. Depending on the height of the warehouse, it is possible to stack 6 or 7 pallets on top of each other. Does that make a difference in maturation? Well, this is one of those areas where whiskey makers usually wind up agreeing to disagree. But here are a couple of things to keep in mind. If you're filling up new barrels, remember that cooperages usually just toast the insides of barrel heads, while the insides of the staves get the charring treatment. Storing a barrel on its side means that the whiskey inside will remain in contact with the toasted heads on both ends throughout maturation, while putting it on its end in a palletized warehouse means the whiskey will stop touching that toasted top head fairly early as the angel's share of evaporation kicks in, and that can cause a slight impact on flavor over time. Now, supporters of dunnage warehouses and rickhouses also claim that barrels stored in palletized warehouses are more likely to leak through the head and run dry, though that could also be because the pallets are usually stored so closely together that it's hard to check barrels inside a stack for leaks during maturation. There is also more potential for leaks through the bunghole on the side of a barrel in palletized warehouses, since cooperages usually drill the bungholes in the side unless a distillery specifically requests it. For instance, the sherry-seasoned casks made at the Paez cooperage in Jerez, Spain for Irish distillers have their bungholes drilled into the heads because Irish Distillers not only uses palletized warehouses, but fills all of its barrels through a bunghole in the head. That's even done with ex-bourbon barrels and other wine casks that were originally filled through bungholes in the side. Middleton drills its own holes in the heads of those barrels, and may replace the old side bung with a new plug if needed. There are some distilleries that use a combination. For instance, Cascade Hollow Distillery in Tennessee has both older rickhouses and newer ones with palletized storage. Our whiskey photo of the week on WhiskyCast.com this week shows you just what one of those palletized warehouses looks like. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at WhiskyCast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot, a unique triple-distilled premium Irish whiskey, combining single malt and single pot still. First fashioned in the 1700s and still a rarity today. Sure, as we say in Ireland, what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com, along with details on our live webcasts, links for our WhiskyCast HD videos and the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast, the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, and of course you'll always find a complete archive of all of our past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. We love to hear from you. You can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address, comments@whiskycast.com.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2020, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.